Hey, what's going on, everyone? In this video, I'll teach you how to build a playbook from scratch, how to get buy-in from your teams, and I'll even share the template I'm using for free. My only ask is if you find this video helpful, smash the like button, subscribe, and share the video to anyone in your network who could use it. I've gotten a lot of comments on how do I get my teams aligned on the same processes, how do we get our teams to use the same tools, and you're in luck because building out process is especially in my wheelhouse. So I'll break this video into three parts. Part one, how to structure your playbook. Part two, how to build it out and get buy-in. And part three, how to maintain it long-term as you grow and scale. So before we get started, just want to call out the template that I'm using. I'll link it down in the description of the video. Absolutely free to use. Hope you find value out of it. Okay, let's get right into it. So for anyone who's not familiar or who's wondering, like Max, what is a playbook? In one sentence, a playbook is basically a document that explains the process for how you and your teams work to get the job done. So it's pretty vague and pretty general, but it can really cover a lot of different things. For project managers, it can cover the steps that it takes in order to get the project done. For a recipe, it could be a set of instructions on what you need to do in order to bake the best cake. It really depends on what your job is, but this document is applicable to literally any job, any industry that you're in. So let's first start with what is a playbook? We already covered that. When we scroll down to then, how do you structure your playbook? How do you think about that? So this is one of the most important parts of building your playbook because if you don't think about the big picture, you may not be focused in terms of the information that you're actually recording down. It can be super confusing if you're not really careful about what you're putting in your playbook, or other teams, when they read it and they look at it, they'll be like completely confused, and that's not the purpose of the document. So when I think about structuring my playbook, there are a couple of guiding points that I want to call out. The first one here is, we'll write these out. You want to think big picture. And what I mean by that is, think about the reason that you're building this playbook. If you're a baker, it may be because you have a lot of recipes and knowledge in your head and you want to get that down on paper. So think about the purpose. What are you trying to accomplish through this build? For project managers, a lot of times it's you have certain types of installations or projects that you're constantly doing. The work gets pretty repetitive. You may have a lot of processes that just are not efficient. And by building a playbook, it ensures that you and your teams are following a very standard approach to getting the job done. So think big picture about the reason for your playbook, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It takes a lot of time to get it built. It takes a lot of time to draft it. It takes a lot of time to get buy-in from your teams, and you're constantly editing it when it's built because it's a living document. Things are always changing. You should always be improving, looking to update it. So that's point number one. Think big picture. Point number two, think about the processes you want to document. So again, this varies per industry, but in general, there's some type of workflow, or in project management jargon terms, there's an SOP, a standard operating procedure, or a certain way that you want to get the job done. So think about what are those workflows that you want to cover. Once you get those down on paper, then number three, think about how you're going to build it out. And this one is definitely easier than it sounds, but like really think about where you're going to start, where you're going to finish, and how expansive of information you want to record in this document. So again, for example, if you're a baker and you have a bunch of recipes that you want to write down, are you going to make your playbook only the savory recipes, only the meats, only the ones that require a lot of time to cook? Are you going to include desserts? That's a separate type of food than the savory ones. Really think about what all should be in that playbook. When you have these discussions really early on, it can help you focus on what's really important, and the job gets so much easier when you build it out, when you actually have an idea as to what you want. Great. It's as easy as that, right? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I hope this gives you a pretty good idea as to how to structure your playbook. So now that we understand, what is a playbook and how to structure it, let's go over to the other tab here. And here's the template playbook that I've created specifically for you guys. You guys have left a lot of comments on, how do I build a playbook? How do I get my teams bought in? How do I make processes better? Created this document completely free to use for you guys. Really hope it helps you out. So I'll do an overview of what I built. So this is the playbook template that I built for 2024, and we'll go through each page, each section, and again, this is just like really bare bones. It's a template, it's the foundation in which you can build off of. This is not going to be the answer to your problems. More than likely, you'll need to be more specific, but I hope this structure helps you think about the things that might be helpful as you build your own playbook and as you build your own iterations of it. So this is the template playbook. Right off the bat, I think it's important to have a date field, so date updated. The purpose of this is you need to know when's the last time this document was touched, and it's super helpful to have a date field because then you can reference back and say, oh, I created this document, last updated it maybe a year ago. Well, a year from today that's a lot of time. A lot of things have probably changed. So it gives you a good indication as to how up to date or outdated your playbook and information is. Having a date field is really helpful. Definitely include one and use it. Next, the owners. Owners are important for documentation. It has the ability to give you and your teams accountability. So who is in charge of updating the playbook? Who is in charge of building it out? Who is in charge of the different sections of a playbook? Having owners defined really early on is really helpful. And realistically, if you're the one watching this video, you're probably the owner. You're probably the one that's building it out. You're the one that's taking the initiative to create something that was not there before. It's a lot of work, but honestly, it's really exciting, and it's a great way to have a direct impact on a lot of people on your teams. Good recognition as well. Put in owners, and then next, mission. So what is the mission? This can be easily answered because you've already thought about the structure of your playbook, which we covered previously. So the mission is basically, what is the goal? Like, what does this document contain? What is the purpose of the document? What do you hope to get out of this document? Try to answer those questions. Make it really specific to your projects and your processes. It'll help whoever opens up this document to quickly glance and see, okay, this is exactly what this document is about. You want to make it as simple and as transparent as possible. Last but not least, always important to put in directions on like what the use case is. So there are different types of playbooks. There are playbooks that are internal only workflows for how you and your teams get the work done. A lot of that information, a lot of that documentation, you may not want to share with your clients, with any external counterparts. So you want to specifically call out, what's the use case of the playbook, when to use it, who to share it with. Be very detailed about that. It really helps save a lot of headache later on, and folks will all be on the same page as to what the purpose is. Great. Let's go to page 2 then. So in the playbook, I always like to include a table of contents. And I'll expose myself here. I don't read a lot of physical books, but I do read a lot of the news online. do a lot of my readings virtually, listen to a lot of podcasts. Table of contents is so helpful because it's an easy way for you and your teams to find the different sections within your probably really long document. Helps them easily click on links to find what they need. They need to reference a particular part of your playbook. Table of contents should include your main topics, any main processes that you want to call out, and you want to make your topics and processes easy to find. So again, using the metaphor for a baker, if this playbook was for a bakery, for the recipes, in the case of the baker wanted to, put down different types of baked goods. I'm not a baker, so if I'm speaking inaccurately here, all the bakers comment down in the chat. But for example, you could have your cakes, you could have your croissants, you could have your different danishes. Those could be the different table of contents, and you build off of that. From the table of contents, then you want to include, what are the best practices for updating this document? Of course, if you're the one watching this video, likely you're the one that's first creating. You're taking that initiative and that first step to creating this document. The next steps are, when you and your team start putting in information into the document, what is the workflow or process for how things get updated? It's really important to think about, because once you have information and workflows defined, you don't want it to be the case where anyone can just go into the document, make their edits without any type of system or approval, or a lot of the legwork and a lot of the really tough work that you guys have done, it may be lost. Things might be changed because anyone can edit. Be really cautious about who is allowed to edit the playbook, and I'll use a project management term here, change management. How are changes going to be made to the document? Who has the ability to make the changes? You want to think about these things. And again, I'm only calling this out because when you initially start building a playbook, this is one of the last things that you think about. Your primary focus is, let's get the information in there. But I promise you, the time will come when everything has been mapped out, and if you don't think about change management, I guarantee you, things will be changed, and when you open up the document, you'll be completely bewildered by things that were not there previously, and it'll be a, oh my God moment, where you'll have to really dig deep, maybe look at version history, and then figure out, how are we going to do this moving forward? So best practices, again, really think about who's going to be making edits, is there a review needed, and what that process looks like. Great. Let's go to page 3 then. So roles and responsibilities. This is really helpful as well because this defines who all is part of your team. It defines who your internal project team members are. These are an example of just some roles that are very common amongst tech organizations. So your sales role, your business development, project team, implementation, data science, engineering, etc. These are examples of the types of roles that may be at your organization. And here is where it's incredibly useful to start defining what those roles and responsibilities are. If you're at an established organization, this may be repetitive, redundant. You may not need to do this because likely there's already someone who's created this. If you're at an earlier stage startup, I guarantee you, something like this is probably not created. Everyone wears a lot of hats. Likely everyone has 2 or 3 roles that they're responsible for. But especially for those who are working in startups, role and responsibility matrix is super helpful, or chart, for defining who is doing what. And if you think about it, the reason for building this out is, not only because you want to be a good team player, you want to, help out your teams, but also if you think about it from a selfish standpoint, if you have a new team member who's onboarding, they will likely not know anything about your organization. There are probably specific nuances, certain additional hats that people wear for certain roles. If you build this out, define it, confirm it with your teams, when that new member onboards, there's less onboarding that you need to do for them. You can just direct them to this document, they can read all of it, and they'll have a good sense as to who does what on your teams. So there's many reasons why this is beneficial. Not only helps your teams, but it can help, onboard new members. It helps make you do less redundant work as you grow and scale, especially. Great. I also include a template for client project teams. So in the case if you are client facing, if your workflows impact external counterparts, it might be a great chance for you to define who on the client team you should work with, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are. In the case if you're very small and you're working with only a couple of clients, a couple of stakeholders, you may want to create separate charts specifically for each of those clients. As you grow and scale, it'll be a great way for you to refer back to as to, how the clients that you've previously worked with were, what their responsibilities were, and you and your teams can learn a lot from that information. Okay, let's go to page, I believe, 4 then. So, after you've defined the roles and responsibilities for your teams, then I think it's important to think about, you don't necessarily need this, it's not a necessity, but it's a good to have, a team charter. So, what is a team charter? It's basically an agreement. It's like a very informal agreement between you and your teams on how you guys work, what the culture is like, what the expectation is for meeting, for getting work done, for doing things. I called out some examples in terms of culture. What is the autonomy style at your organization? Are folks empowered to just build things, to, take as much initiative as they want to? Or do they need to follow a set standard procedure? Do they need to ask for permission in order to change things? Defining what that flow looks like can be really helpful, especially for new team members. And the goal here is when you define how you and your teams work, you're laying the foundation, the ground rules, the expectation, so that moving forward, as you guys work on projects, as work gets really busy, you can hold yourself and your teams accountable to working the particular way that all you guys agreed on. It's a great way to set the expectation for how to get things done. Team charters, really great informal way to write down how you guys will work. This is also something that should be constantly iterated as you and your teams, continue to work on more complex projects, as people get, more busy, taking on more responsibility. Oftentimes, these expectations that you set initially, they don't really make sense anymore. So think about it. Think about it, especially as you grow and scale. Great. Let's go to the next page, page 5. So this is on the methodology. So this is kind of like the meat and potatoes, if you will, the entree of the playbook. This is how you will define the process for your project in the playbook. So this is where you go into more detail as to why this playbook exists, what you hope to accomplish. Are you trying to organize and carry out processes that are complicated? Does it require a lot of input for stakeholders? What is the sole purpose of you creating and putting in hours of work, backbreaking work to create this document? Make that very clear so that any of your team members, anyone who is supposed to read this, will have a very clear idea as to why this was built. Think about your methodology and start writing it out. So here's an example of how you may find this useful, this is an example of how you could organize your methodology. An example is just using a simple table, and in this example, let's say there's a 4-phase project for the baker. Let's say you wanted to break this out, literally use any example, own this process. So for the baker, let's say this is, I'm not a baker, why did I use this example? Let's say you're building a cake. I'll try not to butcher this. Phase 1, it's like, let's say building a cake is like a project. In phase 1, you are making the batter. So the starting point, gather all your ingredients. Make sure you get all the right measuring utensils. Make sure you have everything you need. What's the end point? The end point is you have the base, the sponge of the cake. You have that created. So define a start point and an end point. What's the overview? Well, the overview can be a synopsis of what's going to happen. It can be, you're making the cake from scratch. You're getting all the ingredients. You're measuring them out. You're making sure that, your oven's been preheated. You're making sure that all of these tasks that you need to get done slowly but surely work their way towards that end product, which is you having a cake. Timeline and determinants. Think about what is the order of operations? How long does each step take? Do you need to sequence them, or can things happen in parallel? And then key stakeholders. This one may not be as applicable, but, may want to include your mom there, your mother or your grandmother, who's the expert baker in the family. Make sure that you call them to get their updated, cake recipe as needed. You get the point. Key outputs. Think about what is the end goal, the end point, and then think about how you're going to measure it in terms of quality as well. So for the cake, what do you define as being success? Is it just having a resemblance of a sponge cake? Is it having a perfectly golden, well, I guess it depends on the cake, but a perfectly golden brown cake with no blemishes? Is that considered success to you? Figure out what success means, what the key outputs are, and in the case if you did not reach that key output, what are the next steps in order to rectify the situation? Excuse me. Think really carefully about that. Phase 2. Again, these phases are generic templates. Repeated them. Feel free to customize these to however best fits you and your needs. Phase 2, you have the cake. Then this can be, working on the garnishes, working on the toppings, really using that elbow grease and making the whipped cream, the buttercream, whatever floats your boat. Phase 3, this can be icing the cake, making sure that, the cake's been rested. It's been now fully iced. You have that beautiful, rich, velvety icing all over the cake. Looks beautiful. Phase 4, you put all your garnishes on. All of those strawberries, all of those fresh berries that you washed, that you diced, that you're sprinkling right on the cake. That could be the end of phase 4, which is a completed cake that you are very proud of, that you're sharing with some of your close friends. Again, just an example of how you can think about utilizing this playbook and some of the things that you want to record down. Great. Now we're on page 7. So after you've defined your methodology and the processes, think about what are some of those learned lessons that your teams and yourself learned throughout the process. What are things that you hope to change in the future? What are mistakes that you've made that would make your life easier if you didn't make those again? Think really carefully about, what changes can be made to make processes better, what ideas you have that can make you and your teams more efficient, and just start brain dumping those thoughts here. This can be a very open and honestly sometimes a really messy area. Over here, you just want to get feedback, whether it's from your teams on, for the example of the bakery, could be, you may have not rested the cake long enough and then you iced it. Well, what happens then? The icing probably runs off. It may curdle because it's too hot. Write down those learned lessons so that you and your teams can learn from those mistakes and you can avoid those the next time around. Last but not least, think about resources. Think about how you can build a repository, a really quick little additional table of contents for important resources that your teams may use. Link those out there. Link out maybe the tools that you and your teams are currently using to manage your projects. Define as much as you can here, and I promise you, all that hard work will be so rewarding when your teams are more organized, when there's more accountability for how they operate. And in general, I think it's a great way to make your teams think more about how they operate with intention. And I think that's a very huge thing that oftentimes a lot of other team members who aren't project managers, they don't tend to think about. So with that being said, that is a pretty bare bones template that I've created, linked in the description if you want to check it out. Feel free to use it. I really hope that you find value from it. Let's now get into how do you get buy-in from your team members? So buy-in is one of the trickiest parts of a project, mainly because, especially if you're a newer team member, you're likely walking into an environment where processes have already been put in place. Doesn't necessarily mean that they won't change, but people have already accustomed themselves to certain workflows. They've already, established a working behavior, a routine around how they work. So it's extremely difficult to change, from a habit standpoint, how people operate. And that's not even, going into detail as to whether their workflows are right or not. So when it comes to very, honestly, tricky situations like that are complicated, the best way that you can get buy-in is to first absorb, to learn as much as you can about your team members and their workflows. Do not, if there's anything else that you'll remember from this video, remember this, especially as a project manager, do not assert yourself and do not tell people how to work, how to get their job done, especially when you don't have an idea as to how they're doing things currently. You do not want to involve yourself in those situations because, number one, you don't have the right. You're not actually doing the job, so you're not facing any repercussions. So think about that. And number two, I put 3 fingers up for number two, but number two, if you don't truly understand how your team members work, how are you a credible source? How can they respect you as an individual if you truly don't understand how they operate? So now that we've addressed that in the room, the best way to get buy-in is put in the time to really and thoughtfully understand how your team members work. You've got to absorb everything like a sponge. So ask them, shadow them. What is their day in the life? What are things that they do on a daily basis? Ask them what their pain points are. What are areas that, transparently suck? What are areas that could be a lot better? What do they have nightmares about? What do they dread doing when they come to work? By understanding what those pain points are, you can have a better idea as to truly, understanding your team members. The most important thing from this is you want to have empathy and you want to have a good understanding as to how they operate, how things work. After you've taken the time to really understand your team members and their workflows, their current processes, then start thinking about those pain points that they called out and really take some time to think about, you know, how did those pain points originate? Where did they come from? Is it because of potentially how their current process is built? Really think about those things and start having those discussions with your team members. Have those discussions around their pain points. Dig deeper, learn more, uncover more from those layers. And I promise you, a lot of times you'll figure out, like, hey, it may be because of a certain method, a certain routine that they have in their workflow. Not to say that it's anyone's fault. Of course it isn't. People are just trying to get the job done. But oftentimes there are ways to make your team members' lives better. And by understanding their current workflows, how they operate, how they can potentially make their lives better, easier, maybe bring those ideas to them. Ask them what they think about them. Ask them, is this something that is helpful? Once you gather their feedback, start incorporating that into your playbook. Start picking their brain more. And ideally, when you're building this playbook, the best way to get buy-in is you're building this with your team members alongside you the entire way. That's the secret. You don't want to build something that's purely based on your observations, because oftentimes, you only see one side of the coin. You only see one view. It's really important to get multiple different perspectives when you're building such an intricate and complex document. So, as a summary, make sure that you understand your team members' workflows. Try to understand their pain points. Try to understand, what can make their lives better. And then work together to document what that future state, what that dream goal, that dream state is. I promise you, buy-in will be a lot easier, and you guys will be focused on the solutions, not the problems. Okay, this has been, oh my goodness, over 30 minutes, so we'll keep it really brief here. The last point, how to maintain this document long-term as you grow and scale. Really simple. Reason being, beginning of the document, you already defined what the owners are, you defined the dates in which it was updated. As you maintain this, as it continues to grow, as that document expands and that table of contents grows larger and larger, you'll soon realize that there's a lot of stuff in there. And that's good. The more documentation you have, the easier it is for someone new to read this, to be onboarded, to have a good understanding as to how you work. For your existing teams, it's always a good reminder as to how things have changed, as to what the best current state workflow is. Utilize this document, utilize a date field, define who the owners are, and constantly be learning. Processes were not meant to stay still forever. Just like your iPhone. I remember when I first got my iPhone, it was the iPhone 4, and now we're up to like the 15 or something like that. Absolutely crazy. Things are constantly changing. Technology is changing. There are always ways to be more efficient. Have that growth mindset. Focus on problem solving. Focus on driving towards solutions. And I promise you, you'll build the best playbook out there. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. Comment below, what are some ways in which you found success building playbooks, getting your team members buy-in, and what are some learned lessons? What are some mistakes that you made that you wish others would know? Comment below. Please do. It'll help a lot of people. And thanks so much. It's getting late. Good night. We'll catch you on the next video.